Hi, everybody. This is Joe Firestone for Real Progressives. Very nice to see you here today. Hi, Sandy, who says, I can't wait. Well, it's over now. We are here. The wait is over. Okay. Thank you for tuning in, Sandy. Okay, so I'm going to do an interview tonight with Michael Hoexter. And Mike's background is that he's an activist, a research institute for sustainable prosperity. I said posterity almost. And we've had a number of guests from the center here thus far, including Fidel Kaboub. As far as Mike's concerned, he's blogged extensively at New Economic Perspectives on the application of sound economic and ethical principles to climate and energy policy, including policy advocacy for full employment and skills retraining to address climate change and the challenge, of climate change. His work has appeared on his own blog, Terraverde, Renewable Energy Magazine, at Naked Capitalism, and at other outlets. Where I know Mike from is he was a colleague of mine at the UMKC New Economic Perspectives blog, which of course has been the major home, for MMT in the United States. And the blog posts that Michael put up there were among the most exciting which appeared there during the time, that I was there. He's done chapters on energy pricing and energy conservation in books published by Springer and Elsevier. That's something else I have in common with him because I published, at Elsevier also. He has an inside practitioner's understanding of technological and economic requirements for businesses, but for electric utilities, for governments and organizations to reduce carbon emissions from the built environment and energy production. He co-developed the concept of the renewable electron economy as a basis for a sustainable energy system on his personal blog, Green Thoughts, and in online environmental news sites. In 2009, he formulated the concept of climate Keynesianism as an alternative to neoliberal approaches to climate change. And I guess after that, he got into MMT.
That's right, Joe.
He got into a different kind of super Keynesianism, as it were.
That's right.
He began working in environmental politics in the 1980s, writing about the early successes and conflicts in the German Green Party. He committed himself to fighting climate change starting in 2005. So he's been 12 years down this road now. And Michael has a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Michigan and a BA in clinical psychology from Yale University.
Actually, American Studies, but anyway, it was not in psychology, but anyway, from my background.
Okay, it was in American Studies. Okay, sorry, I got that wrong. Okay, so a very important thing that Mike did in 2015 was he published a series of blogs on the U.S. climate platform. Okay, these outlined why and how the federal government should invest somewhere in the area of $4 to $6 trillion per year on stabilizing the global climate, in addition to preparing the United States and other nations for the upcoming effects of our 200-year-long fossil fuel binge. Uh, his series pointed out that climate expenditures would more than double current federal government spending over a period of 10 to 20 years under his plan, where spending meant investment in real useful resources and people. And tonight, what we're going to talk about is Michael's climate platform and his replies to the objections to passing it. I've been very interested to do this for some time, and the reason why is because I think this is the most important problem that we have to face as people, and the most comprehensive solution to the problem that I've seen happens to be Michael's solution. So now I'm going to turn things over to him. Can you please outline the platform for us, Michael?
Well, in a nutshell, the climate platform is about, as you were talking about, $4 to $6 billion or trillion dollars, a year in federal spending, along with a bunch of regulations and laws that would change the way we use energy and also consume, generate energy and consume energy. So I recommend people read it. There are 10 points in the platform itself that go into some detail. It's a 3-part blog post on New Economic Perspectives. On the high level, I would really like to sort of go back in time to just talk about why this approach. Maybe because this is an MMT audience, it doesn't make sense to do that. But climate policy and climate policy discussions are entirely ensconced in neoliberal thinking, except for a few exceptions, including my own work. And so the climate platform is a sketch of what public investment would look like to actually address the sources of emissions. In other words, where we are emitting carbon and how we can change our use of energy so as to emit basically net zero carbon within 10 years or 15 years at the absolute maximum. So it would be an emergency situation, as in the World War II mobilization. And so this framework of a climate emergency is very important, because most climate policy in the high-level discussions that are on the international level and also in the United States, obviously now to a lesser degree because of the election of Donald Trump, are based on a gradualist framework. In other words, that basically the energy transition is going to be a gradual process over many decades. And it may, the end point of the Kyoto agreement, as well as the California's cap and trade policy, is 20% of 1990 emissions. And that is by no means ambitious enough. And then also the idea of incremental change, gradualist change, ignores many of the physical realities of how energy systems and infrastructure are created. It ignores the fact that an infrastructure has a lifetime of 30 to 60 years. And so to commit to a program, as in another piece I wrote about in 2013 called Carbon Gradualism, or Climate Gradualism, some people call it, a critique of climate gradualism, that basically out of that understanding that gradualism is not the way to move forward on climate, that we need to have an abrupt shift. And to do that abrupt shift, we need public investment. We need governments to lead the climate policy effort. And that is surprisingly enough, and people obviously would think otherwise, but that basically most conventional climate policy discussions are about tweaking the market, adding a carbon price, and seeing how private actors will respond to that carbon price. And that is by no means sufficient, and by no means will it work. So we've already discovered that from history, and I go into that in some detail in the piece that is the title that the $6 trillion per year proposal. Why should the federal government invest $4 to $6 trillion a year? So in any case, to do these rapid shifts, we need the government to create infrastructure at a very rapid rate, and I can go into detail about what kind of infrastructure that is, if you like.
Yes, could you please start to go into the infrastructure that we're going to need?
Okay, so as I was saying, the whole carbon gradualist framework was about sort of the market's going to figure out somehow by putting this price on, somehow market actors are going to discover some new technology that will make us eventually, by 2050, emit much, much less carbon. And we now know, or we found that basically the way we've cut carbon in the most recent past, in the last 3 or 4 decades, as well as we will in the future, is to decide that we are going to build a certain technology and then build it. And that involves government making that decision and either putting together a incentive system that will enable that to happen, or directly investing in that. So the things we need are, in the United States, we need a renewable energy supergrid. That means linking the energy transmission infrastructure, the electricity transmission infrastructure together, so that we can use renewable energy from all parts of the United States to serve demand when it is needed. So to transmit electricity in a way across the United States. So for instance, when the wind is blowing in a particular place, to be able to transmit that to where the demand is. For instance, if people are getting up in California at a certain hour, but the wind is blowing in the Atlantic Ocean, in other words, offshore, that energy is being transmitted to where it is needed. And it's a large and, I think, complicated project to create this renewable energy supergrid, but it would involve lots of federal spending. There's no private utilities or transmission owners that have an incentive to create this renewable energy supergrid. And the reason why we need the grid, we need to use electricity, is that, and this is maybe obvious to the audience, but let me just back up a little bit. The way we can use supplemental energy in a zero carbon way is to use electricity. The using of biofuels, for instance, is not scalable. There may be some uses of certain kinds of biofuels in the future, but they have been for instance, corn ethanol, which has been sold as a climate solution or as a renewable energy solution, is a very bad idea. So using electricity and using it as directly as possible, often with as little storage as possible. So that means connecting up the prime movers, in other words, either the wind turbines or the solar panels, directly to where the electricity is needed. Because electricity, you can store it in a battery, but that requires lots of batteries to do that in a way for the entire U.S. Electrical supply or energy supply. But if we can do it more directly from the place that the energy is, the renewable energy, which is either wind or solar, in most cases, and some water, some hydroelectric power, to do that in the most direct way possible, it requires a grid that unites users and the places where the energy is actually coming from nature, either the sun or the wind or the falling water. So, or tidal power or geothermal power. So anyway, the critical public good is a renewable energy supergrid. Another area where the federal government needs to spend money is on creating a high-speed rail system that can unite, that can basically reduce or eliminate much air traffic or routine traffic on roads that is long distance travel. And it's a technology that's been around a while. We could go to a maglev system. Maglev is also an existing technology. Maglev, magnetic levitation, it sounds very science fiction-y, but it is actually something that at the Shanghai airport, there's a maglev, and in Japan they have maglev trains, and it can go about 300 miles an hour. It's not as fast as a jet airplane, but it is fast enough. And given the distance in the United States, perhaps we should be considering basically a maglev long distance train system, maybe with high-speed rail and some other parts. But I don't know if you've heard of Hyperloop. Have you heard of Hyperloop, Joe?
Yes, I have heard of Hyperloop.
Okay. Unfortunately, Elon Musk, though he is a figure of, let's say, there's a German word called Schillund. He's a figure with two sides. He's a Janus-faced figure. How about that? That's a good one. Janus-faced.
Yes, that's a good one. He is Janus-faced.
In that he makes some positive contributions and he makes negative contributions. So
yes, he's kind of a mythological figure by now.
He is. Well, he's made a mythological figure. Unfortunately, he's a man. He's just a man, but he's not a mythological figure. But anyway, he is. He's proposing this basically a train in a vacuum tube that's called or a high speed, a supersonic train in a vacuum tube. And the problem is the vacuum tube. You can't create such a long vacuum tube, or let's say it's a pie in the sky thing. Maybe eventually we will create vacuum tubes that can be sealed enough along a 2,000 mile route that it makes sense to do a hyperloop. But right now it's a solution that's blocking a more viable solution. In other words, even though maglev sounds science fiction-y, it's actually quite a stable technology, especially in Japan, and then or in China now too. And so high-speed rail. So there's this kind of unfortunately, we have a technological fix, sort of, let's say, a gee whiz. Let's go with a new fancy thing, when in fact we can go with an advanced technology that already exists, and that is the
maglev technology. I think I first ran into that technology back in the 1960s.
Well, yes,
it's I was on my first job. It's been around for a long time.
In Germany, there was there's a maglev train. Unfortunately, it didn't work out so well, but we have better examples of maglev that have worked better. Anyway, it's as I say, in Japan they do have a maglev line, and anyway, the principle behind this is to pick technologies that are advancing but that are not pie in the sky, because we don't have time for pie in the sky. We don't have time to wait for an absolutely wonderful, magical solution when we have very, very good solutions right now. And so, because we don't have time, because this is a climate emergency. I don't know if you've experienced it in Maryland, Joe, but out here we just had wildfires for 2 weeks. I mean, our climate is groaning from the emissions that we have been creating over the past century and a half, essentially, but mostly over the last 50, 60 years. And so we're already experiencing climate change in a way that is very troubling. And so we can't wait around for a billionaire to decide, can he create a vacuum tube that is 1,000 miles long or not? Can his boring machines do what? actually the boring machines are potentially helpful for doing maglev or high-speed rail, and not necessarily for his hyperloop. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent, but I just wanted to. There's a principle behind it in that we need to be investing in scalable solutions that are here now, and so wind turbines are steadily improving, solar panels are steadily improving, and so all of those things should be connected up in this super grid. And then also we need to be building these, high-speed rail that will reduce our dependence on automobiles, reduce our dependence on airplanes, and then we need to be building buildings that are very, very efficient, made of. We need to be reducing our use of steel and concrete in buildings. So there are technologies now where we can use wood to build buildings that are 15, 20 stories high, and have characteristics that are more favorable than a building with steel, made of steel and concrete. They be made with panelized wood, so they can be put together very quickly on site, and they can also be made to the passive house standard, which means that they use very little heat to energy to heat or cool them, and all of these things can be done fairly rapidly using materials that are available, including the forest, for instance, dead forests that, like in pine beetles, have eaten the dead forests in BC and British Columbia and other areas, and we could use the basically wood that is not very high quality wood to create these what's called CLT, cross-laminated timber, or DLT, dowel-laminated timber, and create beams that are very, very big and very strong, so that can support, and they're very fire resistant, and they're very earthquake resistant. And so anyway, there are technologies that we have now that are very green, and that require us to do things slightly differently. So in terms of the money and the federal government, someone tweeted cannabis anyway, or so anyway, that is
So this is a little bit of a tangent, but how can you fireproof a wooden building that's about 20 stories high?
Well, actually, the wood a massive piece of wood. In other words, this is wood. This wood that's much more massive than a typical 2x4. With these massive pieces of wood, they've done fire tests, and what happens is that a char layer is created on the outside by the fire, and so that char layer keeps the fire from penetrating into the structural integrity of the building. So a CLT building is better than, actually, someone just says steel melts. It's true. So that the charring of the outside of these columns, for instance, will keep them in, unless the fire is so bad that, for whatever reason, it penetrates other parts. But anyway, the fire tests have shown the CLT buildings to be superior to steel concrete construction. So now I think someone is tweeting or texting about some of the taller buildings require partly concrete in them, some of the designs, but eventually some of these designs could use perhaps 90 or 95% renewable material in the construction of the wood. Of the building. So
that's really fantastic.
So and there are you can imagine other innovations. The sort of the long-term goal on this is, well, it's obviously is to reduce emissions to zero very rapidly, but there are a series of sustainability crises that I write about in these pieces that we need to be inventing an entirely green and sustainable industrial chemistry. In other words, or social metabolism. That means that what are now considered wastes are actually raw materials for either plants or other organisms to use, or us to use again to create other materials. So, in other words, that an entirely green industrial chemistry is something that requires a lot of concentration and thought, and it means reducing the use of obviously a very, very high temperature blast furnaces, for instance, for steel. So we have to figure out ways to create a civilization that doesn't prey on the future, and that's one of the challenges. But to start, we need to address the critical crisis of emissions. So carbon emissions are what is the sort of the time-sensitive thing, and then also the heating of the planet as well.
Okay. So you've given us a little bit of some of the technical problems involved. You specified in your blog posts two forms of the platform. The first form was essentially a list of slogans. But could you discuss that list of slogans for us here?
Well, refresh my memory. Which are you talking about? The blog post, the one the 4 to 6 trillion per year, or are you talking about
the earlier one on the platform?
Okay. So I need to refresh my memory. Can you still see me? Here, hold on.
I can still see you. Yes.
Okay. You're quizzing me on work that I did a few years ago.
Okay, can I read off the list and then you make some comments?
Sure.
Okay, popular rule, not a big money rule.
Well, I mean, this is a contemporary. This is something that I don't. There are many sources for this. I'm not original. This is not an original thought by me. It's simply.
Oh, I know, but essentially, what I'm asking is, why is this a necessary part of the platform?
Well, I mean, this gets to, I think what I'm focused on right now is actually, I mean, the piece that I wrote, which is the subject, is about 2 years old.
Yes,
and what I'm focused on right now is, and I haven't written anything since about January, in part because I'm trying to figure out how to address these issues in an environment where we have a president and an administration and a Congress that is diametrically opposed to what I've just been talking about. In other words, it is the furthest interest of them, as well as it's probably beyond their intellectual capability, as well as their moral capability to address what I just talked about, and because this is a very big project, and I mean, these things are what I'm discussing are considered to be hyper green ideas, very, very, demanding, ideas. They shouldn't be. They should be common sense. I think they're common sense, but some people might think of them as being very, very, obscure. But they should be our.
Okay, so let me tell you what my interest is here.
Okay.
I am not so interested in the present with respect to Donald Trump. Okay, I'm interested in what we might be able to do in 2018 or 2020. Okay, in other words, the way I see things is the most we can hope for, okay, under Donald Trump is to block his nonsense and also the nonsense of the Republican Party and the neoliberals and the Democratic Party for the next 3 years until we can really change things. So what I'd like you to do is to assume that we will be able to develop our movement and we will be able to gain control of the federal government, okay, in 2021. And then we'll be able to do some serious things, such as implement your platform.
Right. Well, I mean, I hope that too.
And so that's why I'm interested, okay, in letting our people know what that platform is and what the main objections to it were that you considered.
Well, I mean, there's the platform, and then there's the objections, which are the $4 to $6 trillion. Why shouldn't the U.S. government? That was the document addressing objections, and that at that time I hadn't realized that a man of the level, I was assuming in some sense that the Democrats would win in 2016. Okay.
Oh.
You know, and I actually helped. I helped with the climate mobilization. The climate mobilization, which is a group that I'm involved with, that we helped influence the Democratic platform to assuming in some through a man named Russell Green, who was a Bernie Sanders delegate to the. We got some language into that platform about addressing the climate emergency through a meeting of scientists and engineers in the first 100 days of the presumed Democratic / Clinton administration. And that didn't come to pass. Okay. So I'm needing to adjust my thinking, and I think it's not entirely an accident that in other words, Trump won for a number of reasons. Obviously, some of us we share in terms of our own perspectives. I imagine you were a Bernie Sanders supporter, or maybe some other supporter of another.
Well, you bet I was a Bernie Sanders supporter.
Okay. So anyway,
most of us here were Bernie Sanders supporters.
Understood. And I still support him in what he's doing. But I think that there needs to be a focus on, to do the things that I'm talking about. There needs to be a focus on our worth. In other words, people need to value the survival of the human species, their survival, at a higher level than they do right now. They need to and they need to challenge the plutocratic rule that, I mean, both Trump represents, Clinton represents. You know, the rule. In other words, and there's a gentleman named Umair Haq who writes for Harvard Business Review, and he.
Yes, I've heard of him.
Right, and he I sometimes disagree with him, but he is a very perceptive fellow. He's a very intuitive fellow, and he talks about a Nietzschean vision of, in other words, basically that the plutocrats are somehow super people. Okay, that the idea is that people that basically are intimidated by these people, by the Koch brothers, by it's spelled a little differently, but yeah, Haque, I think, yes. So
that is how it's spelled. I tend to typo a lot of things.
Oh, it's a typo. Yes, there we are. So anyway, he talks about Nietzsche, in other words, as being the prime reason why we in the United States are struggling as we are with and in other countries, I think, with our the kind of governments that we have right now, including also the kind of Democratic Party we have, in that there's a belief in a class of very superior people, and we don't matter as much. Us ordinary people don't matter as much because there are these very, very, whatever. And I'm not saying the people who are listening, some people are objecting. I see their texts. They're saying they're objecting to me saying this. I'm just stating what I think is why we don't have mass movements that are demanding that we act to save ourselves, act to rescue the human species, rescue ourselves, our children, the prospects of the species. And that means, in part, placing a value on ourselves that's higher then it's because the neoliberal project has intimidated people a great deal. And
yes, but not us.
Well, okay.
We are not intimidated. We are invigorated.
Good. Well, good.
And we're going to win too.
Good. But having, I think it's important to be able to look at what it is that you need to ask people the questions. What do you want? Because
I agree.
Because you have to ask people because look, I've been active in climate politics for 15 years or 12 years, let's say, and it's surprising to me that everybody that there is people are pointing out that we're in agreement about the climate science. Most of us say it's a catastrophe. There's a catastrophe that's coming. Okay, but the solutions proposed are almost always inadequate. They are thin tin whistle. Okay, so, and what most of the time, to me at least, it seems like people are intimidated. For instance, there's the idea of divestment. That people say, well, we're going to divest from fossil fuels. Like Bill McKibben is he's done some great work. He's been a great campaigner in some ways, but he's been focused very much on divestment. And divestment is a thin tin whistle.
Yeah.
To what needs to happen. The idea is it's not based on economic reality, in that people will still continue to buy fossil fuels unless government decides we're going to do something different. And so there's a mismatch. There's been a huge mismatch between the statement of the problem and the solution proposed.
Yes, I completely agree.
Huge gap.
We certainly are not going to succeed by divesting ourselves of the fossil fuels while we fill the gas tanks in our car every day.
That's right.
That is not a solution.
We're providing a stable supply of funds to these companies, even if we divest our 401ks from Exxon or whatever. And so, this is, and so anyway, to understand this mismatch, and also on the other side, not necessarily divestment, but talking about the neoliberal solution of markets and the carbon price, saying we just have to agree on a carbon price. We just have to get something in there, some kind of. It's weak. It's very, very weak. It is not standing up and saying our lives matter. Government needs to protect us. Okay, and government needs to protect our futures. And this is this very basic thing. Now, this can be transposed to a number of issues: a job guarantee, Medicare for all of these things.
Right. I noticed in your platform there was, of course, popular rule, not the big money rule. There was a living wage, in full employment. There was end abuse by the police and discriminatory law enforcement, and abuse of the Second Amendment. A real economy, not a Ponzi Wall Street economy. Electrify energy use. That was the first item that was directly related to resources and to fuel. 100% zero carbon electricity. Prioritize transportation options for health and the climate, the renewable energy supergrid, which you touched on here, secure finance for renewable energy generators, very, very, very important. Definitely going to need the help of the federal government to do that. No financial penalty for utilities to go green. That, of course, would cost a lot of public money. Okay, notice I didn't say taxpayers' money. I said public money.
Got it.
Because we don't say taxpayers' money here. It isn't taxpayers' money. We don't talk about that. Okay, and item 11, 1 million frequent solar electric buses for the climate emergency. Number 12, safe streets for walking/biking. Number 13, orderly, stepwise liquidation of fossil fuel industries, banning extreme fossil fuels. 14, ultra-high performance in comfortable buildings. 15, revitalize communities with land value taxation. 16, fossil-free agriculture. 17, remove atmospheric carbon via better agriculture and forestry. 18, nationalize, electrify, and multi-track railways. 19, continental high-speed rail or maglev network. 20, rising $80 per ton carbon tax and import tariff. Number 21, public information and workforce training for climate action. Number 22, climate savings bond program. Number 23, stopgap geoengineering with UN coordination. Number 24, help communities stay dry, whole, and productive in a changed climate, which of course we're now seeing every year.
Right.
Constantly. And we're not seeing the communities stay dry. We're seeing them get destroyed. Research climate and sustainability solutions, and reward service to climate and sustainability effort through a congressional medal. Okay, and you estimated the cost of implementing something like this at $4 to $6 trillion per year. Why so much per year? I mean, why that? $4 to $6 trillion, as you pointed out, is twice the current level of federal spending.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what I figure is that we probably have about $2 trillion in policy space that could be filled by deficit spending now without getting into demand pull inflation. And you're advocating for $4 to $6 trillion a year. Now, what would that $4 to $6 trillion a year do, and what kinds of arrangements would we have to make to free up that $4 to $6 trillion a year?
It's quite easy to, given the impinging crises, it's quite easy to spend that money. So there's no end of uses. Now, to get the productive capacity to use that productively in the beginning would be hard. In other words, we would need to build up our capacity to, for instance, like Proposition 1, like to build trains, okay, and build rails. So we don't have that capacity right now. We would import it mostly from China right now, because China is one that's making rails, trains. And they're making solar panels, and they're making wind turbines, though we do make some wind turbines here. So we do not have the productive capacity here right now and we would need to ensure that producers would have a stable source of income over a period of years for them to build that here. So we wouldn't just say, well, we'll throw you a couple $100 million this year and a couple $100 million next year, and then maybe we'll see how it goes.
No, we'd have to guarantee them the funding for a long term.
Right. That kind of capital investment requires stability. Okay, it doesn't. The whims of or just, well, we'll throw you a little bit of green money somewhere, or like the Obama the Obama stimulus package, say, well, high speed, we'll do high speed rail, but it won't be really high speed rail, and it'll just be a few, $50 million here and there.
That was nonsense.
And so
that was obviously nonsense from the start.
So it requires an ambition, a level of ambition, and a framework to saying, look, we have this goal. The goal is to connect city X, citywide, all these cities the U.S. High Speed Rail Association has a map of what the high speed rail they want to build, which we should build. Okay, they have the U.S. High Speed Rail Association. It's a map of all the routes that they think, and probably we need more. Should it be the high speed rail rather than the maglev? That's something that should be discussed. They're advocating for high speed rail because, in part, they're an industry organization that represents Bombardier and Alstom and a bunch of different other producers of high-speed rail equipment. Okay, and that's where they get their money from the existing high-speed rail producers, which happen to have most of their business in Europe and Asia. But anyway, that level of, but I'm just talking about one area. So they would need to have this commitment of basically a huge program to do this in all rapidly, a huge program of investment. And I'm just talking about the rail part. If we talk about, for instance, New York City is threatened by flooding, okay, by rising sea levels.
Yes, I know.
Do we build a seawall? Like, basically, do we go Dutch on some of our low-lying cities? Also, do we need to make a decision about Florida? Like, much of Florida is low-lying.
Yeah, going to be underwater.
We can't build a seawall around the entire perimeter of Florida. What do we do about that? I mean, that's a very grim thing that I don't understand enough about the geography of Florida to make that determination. But anyway, we're talking about I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. Conceivably, they could build a wall outside the Golden Gate and essentially mitigate flooding. But it would be a large infrastructure project to build a seawall or a lock essentially outside the. So I mean, that's the more depressing side or the more defensive side of this. But we're talking about many, many billions of dollars just for any one of these projects. So
yes, I understand.
And then this grid, the super grid, the renewable energy super grid, would involve buying from private enterprises their grids and saying, we're going to make this a public resource, and so we need to buy all this grid, and we probably need to buy the tracks to make the high-speed rail. In other words, because that's private. Right now, it's privately owned in the United States, except for a thin portion of the Northeast Corridor. It's almost all owned by private companies. So you'd have to buy that if you want to maintain the semblance of being a capitalist economy, which, I think that's, I do have a socialist background in some way or another, but I don't consider myself a socialist right now. But we need to. This is a mixed economy we're talking about, and the public. We need to bring into the public domain in a way that is fair enough, and for parties involved in this, because we also don't want to. They have, for instance, the people who own the railways have some knowledge about managing railways, and we don't want them to be be opposed to what we're doing, because this is part. I mean, they will be opposed to it, but we don't want to be so antagonistic to parties that do have information that we need to really create the infrastructure we need. So anyway, we're talking about so many massive investments that, yes, the price tag of $4 to $6 billion a year, $trillion a year, I'm sorry, is very conceivable. And in terms of, yes, we're talking about creating an economy with a higher than optimal level of demand in it from the public sector, and how to manage that demand. I do go into some detail in both the climate platform and also the why shouldn't we invest $4 to $6 trillion per year post, and it involves a carbon tax, among other things, a fairly high carbon tax, and also involves a climate bond program to encourage people to not to spend the money that they earn, because they'll be earning probably higher. I mean, the demand for labor will be very high, so wages will go up. So we want to make sure that people don't spend all their money right now and bid up the price of food, bid up the price of a bunch of different things.
Yeah, it's going to be a situation similar to the Second World War.
Exactly.
Where we have to drain demand out of the economy.
Exactly.
Through a bond program of some sort, so the government is able to spend more. We'll have to make room for government spending.
Exactly.
Both through taxing and also through a bond program.
That's right.
But apart from that, we'll have to use whatever deficit spending policy space we have based on the particular level of GDP that we have, okay, at any time. So my question, which I'm coming to, okay, on this, which is a fascinating one to me, okay, is that when you look, okay, at MMT, and you look at, at deficit spending over a period of time, when you deficit spend, you add something to the economy if you deficit spend on the right things. Then there's also a fiscal multiplier, which actually multiplies the GDP more than that.
Sure.
So let's say if we took advantage of the $2 trillion, okay, in policy space, okay, that we have now, we actually might expand our GDP by up to 3.5 trillion, or 4 trillion more than it is now.
Right.
In which case, this creates additional deficit spending policy space, assuming, of course, that we're going to continue to run the kinds of trade deficits that we're running right now and have the same demand for saving, okay, that we have now. So if that were to be the case, while the percentage of policy space as a percent of GDP might remain the same, the amount of money we could spend each year would actually be increasing due to our expansion of the economy itself. It would be as it was in World War II, where the economy could expand at a hugely rapid rate, and yet we could use various kinds of instrumentalities to avoid inflation, okay, and hyperinflation, including price and wage controls.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of. This is a plan. I'm going to use a bad word. I'm going to use a word that people don't like to talk about. Planning. There's planning involved in this.
That's okay. I'm for planning.
Yeah, right. Okay.
No. Okay by me.
but you're considered even in the heterodox economics, you're considered to be extremely left-wing and dangerous if you talk about planning as being a component of economic thinking. And of course, we need to understand. We need to recreate. I think an understanding of what is the judicious application of planning in an economy, and even in the context of an emergency like this, because this will be more planning than what we would have in an economy that would be running on its own, let's say, or the private sector of the economy running more independently and autonomously than it would in this particular situation. In this situation, it is more dirigiste, okay, that the government, well, beside you're talking about wage and price controls, and you're also, and there are various dampening. We've been talking about taxes, we've been talking about climate bonds, we're talking about price controls, and so all of these are, about the money side, but then there's also the direction of the money. Place it, where do you put the money, and how do you, so there's regulations, which people do talk about regulating the private economy, but then there's the creation of a new economy or new parts of the economy based on this industrial policy that I'm describing, essentially the policy of creating an electricity-driven transport system, also human-powered. As you mentioned, one of the parts of the platform is creating more opportunity for people to get around on their bikes or on an electric
bike. Michael, you said another bad word there.
What?
Industrial policy.
Oh yeah, no, I'm about throwing. I'm a real.
Now you're throwing a lot of dirty words around, Michael.
Boogeyman. Here we go. Okay. So yes, no. This is I'm industrial policy is not a bad thing. In fact,
absolutely.
We have cut carbon in the past because of industrial policies. The feed-in tariff is a form of neoliberal-friendly industrial policy, and the feed-in tariff is how the Danish and the Germans brought down the price of wind and solar, respectively, by a feed-in tariff. And essentially, it's an industrial policy deciding we want to build a certain industry, we want to create a certain kind of industry, so we are going to create a policy that subsidizes that industry. So anyway, this plan is about reshaping the economy and changing it, certain sectors of it, while leaving other sectors pretty much the same, though with changes in how they do business. For instance, think about a restaurant. How do restaurants deal with not using natural gas? How do they, natural gas adds to the atmosphere, adds to the carbon pollution in the atmosphere. Natural gas is a very important part of how restaurants currently prepare food, and so how is that going to work out? So, I mean, you could tax the carbon that is emitted, and eventually restaurateurs would have to be using more electricity and so forth and so on. They probably have to figure out ways to prepare food in the way that people like consuming it, with electricity and with maybe wood of some kind, with properly vented, systems so that the wood smoke doesn't get in people's lungs and so forth and so on. But anyway, so all of this is, it requires changes in regulation, requires maybe taxation, maybe an industrial policy of carbon-free restaurants. What do they look like? Or something, low carbon or zero carbon restaurants. It's it's something that I haven't thought through I'm not a chef, so I don't know about all the different preparations that need to happen in a kitchen. But anyway, that is the kind of, I'm getting into an area where, I like food and so forth and so on, so I'm bringing that up. But there are other areas of the economy where a similar attention to detail and interaction with the existing market needs to occur, and then a plan needs to be created saying we are going to do this. So will simply a disincentive of tax do it? Will regulation do it? Will an investment, some combination of three? Will an investment program do it? Will government, public enterprise? We'll have government. I don't know. In housing, this is another area that I'm active also locally here, where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we have some of the most unaffordable housing in the country. And now that's also not exclusive to the Bay Area. And I am part of a movement, the YIMBY movement here in the Bay Area, which is about building more dense housing near transit, among other things. And so, in other words, more multifamily housing near transit. And that movement, is focusing on a particular issue and trying to create, the possibility for doing this. But one option is, we probably need more public housing. We need more and better public housing. It's a bad word. It's like, well, how do we create public housing doesn't recreate some of the bad things about public housing in the past, but still creates this affordable base of housing for people who can't afford a market because right now for an ordinary working person on an ordinary wage, or even a salary, even a tech worker in our area, they can't afford to buy a house. You have to be a certain level of tech worker. You have to have all the stars have to align. You have to have the bank of mom and dad help you out, to buy a home in this area practically.
Yeah, what kind of salary does it take to buy a home now in San Francisco?
I think it's around 180K.
Oh my God! So that's a healthy salary even at Google, right?
Oh yes, no, you have to be one of the higher ups to really. I mean, obviously, if you have a 2-salary family, I mean, you can manage. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying a single person. Maybe the 2 salaries together equal 180K. So, but still, it requires 2 good earners in the family, and so anyway, that's due to the shortage of housing here. And due to a lot of different regulation issues and so forth and so on, New York is not as bad as this year. This is some of the worst in the year, and some of it has to do with the demand. Basically the demand for housing is strong here because of the jobs, basically the tech jobs. So, but anyway, so. The reason why I brought that up is that I think the government might need to create a minimum standard of house, a sort of regulation that involves energy use, sustainability, materials. I mean, multifamily house. They might need to build them themselves because right now they might need to create the market that eventually developers will be able to do it. But first, the government, because of its ability to spend, needs to be able to build these houses that are climate stable, durable enough, fire resistant. We've had these fires out here, where houses have just gone up in flames, and some of that has to do with the way they were constructed and the time they were constructed. And so there are a lot of different issues that need to be balanced that a for-profit developer may not be able to do at the first. So they need help. So that's another form of industrial policy that needs to be created with the goal of creating homes that are sustainable, that are affordable, that people can live in.
Okay, so another way to look at this is that you're suggesting a systematic program for redevelopment, of our country. But even though we think of our country as being a developed country, in terms of the need to adapt to climate change, we are actually an underdeveloped country.
Oh, yes.
That is not really developing very rapidly.
Well, I mean, it's funny that you talk about it. This is an anecdote, but it's not exactly. But I used to live in an apartment building where there was a young woman from China who was. I think she was going to a local for-profit university here, and I think she was from a wealthy family. She drove a luxury car, I remember. So she was not poor. And I remember though once running into her on the BART system, which was built in the early 1970s. And she was very, she had this face of like disgust on her when she was and she was saying, this is so gross, and in China, everything is new. I mean, some of it has to do with the time that they've developed. In other words, they have just put in these train systems. Meanwhile, we had our spate of development of public transit either a century ago or more recently in the 1960s and 70s at the latest. and maybe, or more recently in some cities, so some cities have newer single lines of transportation, but it's very, very sporadic, and we don't have a commitment from the federal government level to create lots of public transportation. So yes, this is a redevelopment policy. We in the United States and in Canada and in Australia have had a relationship to the environment and to resources that is very casual, that is very
Yes, I think that's the understatement of the year.
And actually, the New York City subway has. Someone tweeted that they have some new cars that are very nice. The BART. She should compare the BART system to the New York City subway. The cars in the New York City subway system are often new and very nice. But anyway, yes, but the tunnels are very old. But anyway,
and not very nice.
Yes. So anyway, our attitude, like, I don't know if you've seen these pictures from the 19th century of these piles of birds that were slaughtered by hunters, just for no reason at all, simply for the reason that they could shoot. There were so many birds, and that they could shoot them easily. So there's pictures of excess use of nature and the environment that you sometimes run across when you look at our photo archives or whatever from the 19th century and even into the 20th century. And so we have built our society basically on a sort of a casual, I'd say opportunistic. In other words, it's a very opportunistic way to say, oh, look, there's this oil and gas, let's use it. Oh, look, we found this. Let's use it. It's here. It's easy. And it's not like we're unique. In other nations have also had a similar attitude to that environment, but we have been the extreme. And in terms of our youth, or we and the Australians and the Canadians to some degree have been extreme in our casualness with which we've had this expansive. I mean, it was. North America was fairly thinly populated by Indian tribes, but then we, massacred and we committed genocide against the American Indians. So basically, a continent was virgin land, so to speak. So, and we kind of have this attitude of, so yes, it requires a transition to a different ethic of understanding of using the natural environment. So it needs to come from people and from people's understanding, but it also needs to come from government. So there needs to be a simultaneous interaction. It's not just individuals becoming virtuous by doing the right thing. Like, I'm not entirely virtuous, and I occasionally fly and so forth and so on. I don't think that it adds up by individual virtue, but there needs to be an interaction, a realization of an ethic of caring for posterity and for the environment and so forth and so on. And that means in part restructuring how we use public space. And, if we can bicycle somewhere, and we need to just create the means to do that without endangering our lives by creating a bike path that's protected by parked cars or whatever it is. So, I mean, it's not really the bike path thing is actually the easiest. That's so simple. That's something that we don't even need the federal government to fund. Local governments and state governments could fund that kind of thing. But it would help if the federal government also helped accelerate that program. But I think that changed. I think you were touching on something that I want to point out a little bit earlier about in terms of this approach, in that these changes, some of them are favored by educated people who have, live on the coast in the blue states and so forth and so on, and in densely populated areas. And to us, it's less of a transition than someone who lives in Kansas, in a suburb of Kansas City, or in Michigan. I used to live in Michigan. where people are basically always in their cars or in their tract house, or in a whatever development somewhere. They're constant. They go to a mall. They go to a to buy things. And though I grew up in a place where we went to malls to buy things, so it's not like it's. And I grew up in New Jersey, so that's a coastal area. So it's not only concentrated, in the coastal area or in the non-coastal areas. Like the United States and Canada are used to just basically a car-driven, suburban or semi-urban, rural lifestyle. But
Absolutely.
I think that there needs to be, the reason why I packaged all those demands together, all that long list, including social justice demands and wage, and that there really needs to be a trade-off. In other words, people need to be given things as things are taken. Some things will be taken away. Some things are going to be. It's just we can't. Like I went out to get some food for lunch. And I walk back to, and I live in a neighborhood that, it's a mixed neighborhood. It's a neighborhood with poor people and rich people, or, not very rich people, but, and anyway, there's a car of sort of, medium vintage, maybe 15-year-old car, not a bad looking car. And it was just sitting there, and the engine was on. No one was in it. It probably was locked, and the engine was on. Okay, and there was not a person. It wasn't anyone sleeping in the back and so forth and so on. But someone, it didn't cost it. The cost of gasoline is not expensive enough for them not to do that, or there's not an ethic that they have that says I shouldn't be doing this, running my car for no reason.
Yes.
And so. And that, but that person doesn't have a lot. I don't think that person is a wealthy person. They're not, but we need to provide them with a framework where saying, look, we're going to be doing lots of things that change that make it, expensive for you to run your car like that. But at the same time, you're going to get health care, and we're going to provide you with, so there needs to be a give and take. And the climate policies that have been proposed by the neoliberal folk are all about taking, are all about imposing a tax. They're all about saying, and they're not very radical, by the way. They get very timid in part because they say, well, we are imposing this thing that is going to be differentially impact the poor, but we have to be really cautious about it because it's going to make them really angry. So they go halfway on it, or they go a quarter way, and they say, well, it's something that only the utilities are be paying, and it's really just a cap and trade system, and it won't ever affect.
Whereas another kind of approach that would take things away from from some of the poor people, but would also give them employment, but full-time employment at jobs that were really worthwhile, and full fringe benefits.
Right. Well,
and other kinds of advantages involving social environments. So those are things they get. So the things they lose are maybe not quite so important anymore.
Exactly, and I think it doesn't have to be tricky in the sense of not telling them that things are saying like, look, it's a bad idea to run your car, for no reason. It's like to pollute the atmosphere. You're making
right. So that's a bad idea.
Right.
It's very bad for society, right. And we're going to pass a law against that. And if you violate that law, there are going to be punishments.
Right. Exactly. An anti-idling law, or whatever, and people then might invest in whatever hybrid technologies that shut off their engine whenever they don't. If that's, they should go electric. Really, in other words, there's electric people. If they're going to buy a car, should buy an electric car. Should make it very easy for people to do that, and that's really the solution that is rather than sort of harm reduction, but just transition to this is the net zero option, and so and the biking, making biking very, very attractive to people, which is happening, gradually, but it's not happening nearly fast enough. So,
yeah. So let's get to the kinds of objections that you entertained in your other series, dealing specifically with the objections.
sure.
So the first one was it will create too much inflation or runaway hyperinflation.
Right.
Okay, so what's your reply to that?
Well, we've already discussed. Well, we discussed we discussed techniques for reducing inflation. The other aspect of that is the focus on inflation as the summum malum, the worst evil. That people have used over the last 40 years or so to say, if it creates inflation, it's the worst. It's like terrible. It's like,
yeah, remember Weimar, and remember the wheelbarrows full of money.
Right.
That stuff you learned about in high school with those cartoons.
Right. So, it needs to be put to people. This is about human existence. Okay. So, in other words, which is worse, for humanity essentially not to exist or not to be able to prosper anymore pretty soon, or the risk of some inflation? So that needs to be the fundamental, that needs to be the starting point. Instead of talking about to go into techniques, saying we have techniques to limit inflation. But let's go back to the beginning and say, what is most important right now?
Yes, I couldn't agree more with the framing.
Right.
What is most important right now? Is it survival for you and your children and your grandchildren?
Right.
Okay, because that's what's coming down the pike.
Right.
No survival, okay, and no future. Is that really what you want?
Right. Okay. Or I mean, we can say, it could be a survival, but it could be survival that is misery, basically misery of some kind. And yes, inflation can cause misery, but we have techniques to limit it.
Okay, so you also get people who tell you, well, we can eliminate unemployment, underemployment, and income inequality with a much lower expenditure than in your $4 to $6 trillion a year program. So how do you reply to that one?
Well, I mean, we discussed a little bit of why of the excess demand that I think is necessary. But again, it goes back to the first answer. We're trying to limit the risk of human extinction. Okay. And so we need that extra amount of money to create the real objects, the real technical changes and the social and technical changes that are required for us to emit net zero carbon. So to do that,
we need that extra money. And after all, from the MMT point of view, it's only money anyway, and it's costless for us to create that money. So what it really comes down to is whether the excess money we may have to create, okay, in order to do this, creates enough of a risk of inflation, to really create a problem. And even then, we have to ask ourselves, which is the most important risk? The risk of non-survival or the risk of inflation? And we have to make a choice.
Right.
And it comes down again to that choice.
And in that environment, even if we're faced with the high inflationary pressures, bringing in price controls and a strong program of telling people, look, these are price controls. please obey them. If you go to the black market, you are undermining our existence. You're undermining whatever, or you only sell to the black market. Basically, there isn't an element of ethical commitment that is required to do this. There needs to be a high ethical. People need to realize they're part of a collectivity of some kind. Collectivity, another word, that I'm not supposed to say. But we're part of a collectivity, and that the human species is a collectivity of some kind, even though we're each of us unique individuals, and that we need to have an ethical commitment to continuing that project.
We did that once before. We did that in the Second World War.
Yeah.
And we did it to some extent also in some parts of the Cold War, but to a lesser degree.
Yeah.
But we really went absolutely gangbusters in the Second World War on that.
Yeah.
And it worked. There was a collective sort of feeling. And those of us who were born back then, as we were growing up, as we were very young even back then, and like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, we perceived that we were living in a collective and that certain things were done for the collective and duties were owed to the collective by good citizens. And we basically grew up that way. And those of us who grew up during the Second World War or began to grow up during the Second World War, it's a little hard to understand the whole rejection of the collective that started taking place during the latter part of the 1960s and into the 1970s, and then went on steroids in the 1980s. We still don't understand quite how or why that came about. Sometimes I think of it, in terms of a notion of Asimov's. In the End of Eternity, which is a book about time travel, and a group of people who were able to time travel and who tried to monitor the timelines and control the timelines, so they minimized the damage to the basic state of things caused by temporal kinds of innovations. And so there was this idea that there was a basic state of the human society they were trying to preserve. And that basic state involved continuing to stay on Earth and not get involved in space travel, or anything like that. And they manipulated time to make that happen. Of course, the end result of it, which they didn't perceive evidently, actually they did perceive it. In fact, they used it. The power for the time travel was actually generated by tapping into the sun going nova at the end of the timeline for Earth. So somehow they thought of themselves as taking advantage of that for power and weren't bothered by the fact that the whole human race was going to be destroyed by Nova Sol, when it occurred. But getting back to the idea of the basic state, when I thought about the basic state, as applied to American society, and culture, it seemed to me that the basic state in this country was set in the latter part of the 18th century and the 19th century, the spreading out of American citizens across the country, the frontier, the conquest of the frontier, the extreme amounts of individualism. And so it seemed to me that defined the basic state of our culture at that time. which we continue to apply going into the 20th century. And then there were two major events that caused deviations from the basic state. And those were the Depression, and after that, the Second World War. And that created changes in the culture for those of us who were born just before the Second World War, but during the Depression, and continued to be born after, during the Second World War, okay, and after the Second World War, perhaps up until the 1960s. For us, we experienced a culture which was rather collectivist and rather liberal, a state of the spread of liberalism all over the country, such that more and more people were getting elected to the Senate during the 1950s and 1960s who identified themselves as basically liberals, extremely progressive, economically progressive. Actually, many of them just as socialist, if not more, than Bernie Sanders is, okay, at present. Okay, and then it seemed to me that one way you could think of our culture is that there was a reaction to that because it wasn't consistent with the basic state and the long-term trends, okay, of our culture. It was actually a deviation. We didn't see it as a deviation. We saw it, okay, as progress. But in terms of the basic underlying culture of America, it was a deviation from the basic state.
I'm a little less fatalistic than you are in this.
Well, I don't think I'm necessarily fatalistic. I don't believe, okay, in fatalism at all. I mean, I believe it is possible to change culture, and the deviation that was introduced was not simply due to events. It was due to us. We changed the culture because we had to change it during the Depression and during the Second World War. And it seems to me now we have to change it again, and this time in a more permanent way, because what you're outlining here is a program that will last for decades. It won't be for 3, 4, or 5 years.
No, it's a long-term program. It's absolutely it's a commitment to change our culture and our way of doing things, our material culture, our for survival. I mean, some people have phrased this as I'm trying to be a better person. There's a lot of, I would say, a lot of narcissism in our culture in general. So I mean, that's something I studied in my graduate program, and I think it's a culture. There's a cultural problem there that is related to what you've just been talking about, the problem of understanding collectivity versus people being very individualistic, and recognizing that being part of a collectivity is a vital part of being human, as well as being individual. I just go sort of getting back though to why that thing happened that you said that it happened. In my study of this and in my feeling and my experience of it, there was two movements that the collectivity that you were a part of was most satisfying to people who were basically white, middle class, basically from immigrant families of the coming from in the late 19th century and in the early 20th century, who were the Roosevelt Coalition. The Roosevelt
that's me to a T.
The Roosevelt Coalition was becoming both part of the American collectivity, also was very inspiring, was a way to come together and feel a sense of belonging, because the nativism of the 20s and before that, they was kind of exclusionary to those ethnic groups. And then you had in the 1960s other groups who felt marginalized, who were not part of that, people of color, African Americans, who felt excluded from that, were saying, "Oh, look, we want those benefits as well. We want to be part of the collectivity, and we're being oppressed, we're being marginalized." And then you also had, unbeknownst to people at the time, or on the sly, you had a right-wing movement, the neoliberal movement, the Hayeks and the Kochs and so forth and so on, who very stealthily started to use the rebellion of the 60s and also the individualism of the 60s to transform the policy. Also, the inflation of the 1970s, talk about inflation. The inflation of the 1970s is an opportunity to totally change the narrative about governance and about
the key thing was the stagflation of the 1970s, which at the time the Keynesians were not able to explain, and were not able to do anything about. And then that's what led to the failure, of Keynesianism at that time, and to the search for alternatives, and that opened the way for the reaction to really set in spades.
Right, and so that even though in the cultural area we have sort of a turning of the culture to even more to the left, in the sense of people becoming more free to do what they want, in the sense of express themselves in different ways, and also be themselves, in the sense of be their ethnicity, be whoever they are, their gender, their so forth and so on. We have at the same time an economic culture that is saying it's all about the markets and individualism, and government involvement is suboptimal. We don't need the government, and so anyway, they've kind of sandwiched the idea of a collectivity in a way. So we need to revive the concept of a collectivity for a number of reasons, because of survival. In terms of a commitment to a collectivity, it can be a very diverse collectivity. We should understand the power dynamics within that collectivity. We should understand that there are people who have more or less privileges within that collectivity, and that they can use their privileges for ill. They can use their privileges for good. That's something that people sometimes forget when they talk about privilege. But anyway, but still understanding that there's something called I talk about it in terms of deontological morality, duty-bound morality.
Yes, I know what that is. I'm very normatively oriented myself.
So deontological, in some sense, is inconceivable. I just got in an argument with someone on Twitter last night. I imagine this person was anonymous, but I imagine they're younger than I am, and they thought that Bernie Sanders was squabbling with Hillary Clinton about, in other words, this is about the Badana Brazil revelations of the last few days, and this person says he was so sure of himself. I imagine it's a he. I don't know. There's an anonymous person on Twitter, but anyway, but they have a big following. There are someone who is a pundit of some kind on Twitter. Anyway, they're saying correct take is, Clinton and Sanders should stop squabbling and get out of the way for another generation. And I'm for, yes, we need young politicians. We definitely need young politicians, younger politicians. Our politicians are way too old. But and there are some young ones coming up that are good, but Sanders has occupied a position of principled commitment to ideas, and even though I disagree with him on some things, and I don't think he's walks on water or anything, but he has a deontological commitment to change and to human betterment. And it's not about him. it really, as far as I can tell, I mean, yeah, he collects a salary. Does he buy a vacation house for himself? Okay, sure, but it's like, but it's something that people who are younger. I mean, I'm a little younger than you are, and and there are many people.
A little younger.
I'm anyway, but a little bit, but anyway, but I interact with people who are still younger than me, and I think some of them can't conceive of a person.
So do I.
No, but anyway, but I think there's a perceptual inability to see that someone could, like Sanders, actually be committed to ideas and to the collectivity, to saying like, look, I'm here to do this is what I'm about. I'm just doing this because I'm like he sucked it up and he supported Clinton. He was a good soldier. Even though he has his own ideas, so forth and so on. So he's a rare person that we should keep in politics for as long as he wants to be in it. I mean, unless he somehow turns really wacky. But anyway, but still, what I'm trying to point out though is that a generation of people has a problem understanding that someone could actually be committed to a set of rules of right and wrong, and just basically following that and saying it's not about maneuvering for their own benefit and somehow virtue signaling that they're signaling. They're like, oh look, I'm a good person. Look, I'm doing this thing. See how good I am. It's like, I don't think Sanders really cares that. I mean, he cares a little bit about how he's perceived because he's a politician, but it's like, he's really focusing on the object, the policy, so forth and so on. And that shouldn't be a rarity. That shouldn't be something that we find one guy who does that. But anyway, in our era, we have so many people who are focused on their own image. How do I appear? How, what does it look like that I,
right. But going back to Bernie for a second.
Okay.
It seems to me what Bernie is doing is not something generational per se. In other words, there's a certain magic in the generations, and generational change, but that's not a determinant in itself. And what Bernie is successfully doing, at this point, is taking some of the ideas of an older generation, the World War II generation, and projecting them into the millennial generation, where they have actually fertile ground.
Oh yeah,
because of the difficulties which the millennials have.
Oh yeah, no. They're a natural constituency for what he has. He's updated some of his ideas. It's New Deal liberalism updated. That's what Bernie Sanders is. He's
updated. It's specifically the four freedoms and the economic Bill of Rights, updated to the present. Seems to me that's what Bernie is doing, and that's what his commitment is to.
Right, but
that's why it's such a familiar commitment in a way.
Right, but I think I still think though that is that people who throw a lot of crap at him and think that he's very like the Clinton folks who tell he's an egomaniac. They think of him as an egomaniac. They imagine he's an egomaniac. It's like the man is not an egomaniac. I mean, it's like.
In fact, I think he's the farthest thing from it.
I mean, it's like, I mean, is he a saint? He's not a saint, but he's not an egomaniac, It's like, and it's like, but they can't first think of any, they can't imagine that he's doing these things because he believes in an idea, in an idea outside himself that's like bigger than him. An idea that's bigger than him.
That's what I think too.
What?
That's exactly what I think too. And I think a lot of our people think that too. For example, Lynn Dufour just said, I meant to click on Lynn's comment. Her opinion is that Bernie Sanders has no ego.
Oh yeah, I see that there.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean,
I'm not sure I would say that, but he certainly looks like a very unselfish person to me.
he's very disciplined. He's a very disciplined politician in general, and I
He
mean,
is.
and I know that our community. I see some comments. Our community are angry at him for his, his lack of publicizing an MMT perspective, and even though he's been exposed to Stephanie and exposed to, MMT thoughts, I'm pretty sure that Stephanie exposed him to these things, that he still talks like something of a deficit hawk. I don't think he emphasized. I don't think he's screaming about the deficit, but he talks as if he doesn't want to quote unquote blow up the deficit. So and that's a problem. That's an issue. He hasn't grasped how to be a politician that talks about an expansionary fiscal policy. Like, what I'm talking about, what we're talking about here today, that would be even further than, but anyway, simply expansionary fiscal policy for the perspective of, increasing employment and bettering, overall social conditions, which is something that, would be very, very popular. He's still not being able to, and I think some of it is that we in the MMT community need to be able to create a discourse, a narrative that fits for a politician, someone who's actually holding office, because we're not holding office. So it's a little bit of a different position to be holding office and actually, collecting a salary from the government, and being a political leader, and having a discourse about taxes and so forth and so on that is consonant with people feeling the obligation to pay taxes, because they got to feel that obligation. At the same time, saying the federal government doesn't need every single dollar of that tax to do things. So having that obligation, say you have the obligation to pay taxes. That's your obligation. Okay, but the government can act independently of how many of those dollars they have quote unquote collected. And so that's a discourse that needs to be elaborate. I think we need to help politicians with that. I think it's just not a matter of them, saying what Stephanie says or what Warren says or whatever, or what we say. It's about figuring out what makes sense to them, so they can, in their position of leadership, can show themselves to be virtuous people according to the standards of the time. But we think we need expansion of the fiscal policy. We need expansionary fiscal policy for a number of reasons. I think it's for human survival, and I think that human survival trumps all. Sorry for the verb, but anyway, trumps all of the concern about whatever deficits or inflation or so forth and so on.
Yeah, so do I. But that said, okay, if we had the kind of expansion you're talking about, would we then have to worry about a job guarantee?
Well, I think we can talk about a transitional job program, my program requires job training. In other words, not job training so people can be hired, but job training so people can do the new kinds of work that are required in this new economy. So it's not
right, but in the new economy and with all the federal aid, okay, that would be going out, I would assume that the efforts to re-industrialize, to meet the climate crisis, would have ample training funds in budgets, okay, to enable that. Now, whether that would happen through a job guarantee program or not, okay, or through another kind of program, I don't know. Okay, and I'm not saying we should not have a job guarantee program for various reasons that are mentioned by myself, okay, and by yourself, I'm sure, okay, and other MMT people. There are reasons why we want to have a permanent job guarantee program. Maybe I should have phrased my question, okay, in the following way. How low would the numbers in the job guarantee program fall if we went to a program like yours? In other words, would they fall all the way to only 500,000 people in the job guarantee program? In other words, would it be low as that, as opposed to what it might be now, maybe 25 million people in the job guarantee program?
Well,
I mean, it seems to me you're talking about a booming economy as in World War II, where all the labor would be sucked up.
Well, I think that there needs to be a transitional. You can call it. It's just. I mean, you call it a transitional job and training program. So basically, I'm talking about a sectoral shift in so many different industries, not all industries, but a sectoral shift, a shift toward jobs that do not add to our carbon burden, our environmental, our overall environmental footprint. So how do we shift to that? There needs to be transitional jobs that may or may not, and then a training program to funnel people into the jobs that this investment program demands to do the work of retrofitting or fashioning our society to be
refabricating our society,
refabricating our society to being a sustainable society. And so people will start at a point where they don't have the skills, and they might be doing something like, I don't know, helping older people or whatever, or doing something that is unrelated to this climate program. It's simply about social self-care, or any of these other areas that have been proposed for job guarantee jobs that are either low paid work or work that is never done because no one has an incentive to pay anybody to do that work. And so but they're socially valuable or necessary roles. So I think that needs to be attached to a training program saying, well, look, you're doing this job, and we can offer you these skills to becoming air sealer to air seal houses. Air sealing houses is a skilled work that involves using a blower door. It involves creating air pressure in a home to see how much leakage there is, and then going and sealing. And it's kind of tedious. It can be tedious and dirty work in some sense or other. It needs to be paid properly. It's because it's very, very valuable in this economy that we have now and we should have in the future. Because of the leaky houses, you lose energy, and there are a lot of reasons leaky houses are bad. So, but anyway, training people to do that. So we offer people saying, well, you can work, with teaching, kids in this school, so forth and so on. Or we also offer you this program or that program that can help you transition to something else. Because there's some people, there are people who want to work with things, and there are people who want to work with other people. So we have to figure out a range of different options in a job guarantee program or in a transitional and a training program that enables people to be working either with things or with other people in ways that are either socially useful or part of the transition to this economy or the creation of this economy that we need to stabilize the climate.
Okay, yes, I certainly agree, Michael. We have been going now for some time. It's about 9:56. What I like to do, okay, in this program is to stop with either a lecture of mine, okay, or a conversation to have a have a Q&A session with our people for as long as the Q&A session lasts. Are you willing to stay around at least for some of it?
I could stay for another, let's say 20 minutes or so. Is that enough time, or is it half an hour?
Well, I'm not sure it's enough time, okay, but I can continue with the Q&A afterwards.
Okay.
So if you have only 20 minutes, well, that's fine.
Okay.
20 minutes is fine. Okay, before we get started on that, though, what I'd like to do is to say I have the impression we've only scratched the surface, okay, of this area, okay, in spite of the length of our talk. Okay, so I'd like to know if you'd like to come back sometime in the near future, either next week or the week after, okay, and have another session on this topic.
I could do. Would it be the same time on a Saturday?
Yes.
I can check next week. I like to do that. I don't know about the next 2 Saturdays, but let me look to see if this time will work for me. Okay.
Okay, let me know. This is a regular program of mine, and I always run it, okay, at 8 o'clock on Saturday night.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a time frame people are used to, and so we have a pretty stable group of people who come in. So anyway, let's start with the questions. Okay, and Rebecca McClaskey says the problem with energy jobs through the job guarantee program is it could be challenged under the idea that the government is competing with the private sector. And she says, I don't think that is allowed for the job guarantee program. Job guarantee must be work that the private sector refuses to do. So that's her question. Okay. Would you like to take a crack at it? And then after you finish, I'd say a word or two about it also.
Well, I mean, that's assuming that the question assumes that the private sector is the primary sector of the economy, and that the job guarantee serves the private sector. And I'm proposing bringing certain parts of the economy into the public sector, like the rail system and the electricity transmission system, while other parts of the economy will remain in the private sector. So I don't see a hard and fast rule where it says the job guarantee must be work that the private sector refuses to do. I mean, it could be work that the private sector refuses to compensate at a high enough level that you get, good quality work or a decent wage. For instance, I was just describing air sealing. That's a job that doesn't really pay very much money in our current economy, but it's very valuable. So I'm not saying that should be a job guarantee job, but I think it should be a job that people should be trained to do. And then I think certain sectors of the certain either government subsidies or whatever could enable those jobs to be subsidized to a level that they. I'm being distracted. Sorry, I'm being distracted by one of my phones is sort of going off. So I'm sorry. So anyway, I think that the hard and fast rule, a job guarantee must be work that the private sector refuses to do. We need to look at what we're trying to do.
Right. And I think that too. In fact, the way I like to think about the job guarantee, which is maybe a different way, okay, than it was originally thought of by some of the original MMT people, is that we think of things in terms of three sectors of, I'm not sure whether to call it the labor market or just the group of people who might be available for work or who might not be available for work, depending on the people. I see three sectors there. I see a market value sector of the economy, and I see a social value sector of the economy. Okay, and then I see a sector of the economy that merits support simply on a human rights basis. And that sector would contain people who cannot work. It would also contain people who for various reasons don't want to work in either the social value sector or the market sector. Okay. Now, I don't see these as completely coextensive with the terms private sector and also public sector. I think there can be private enterprises in the social value sector, the social entrepreneurial exercise types of enterprises and such. Okay. But I think the enterprises in the social value sector would of necessity be enterprises whose primary purpose is not profit, but is producing social value. Okay, and the question we have to ask is whether those people who would be dedicated to refashioning or refabricating the sector of the economy that is relevant for climate change, whether this is something that we really ought to allocate to the market sector of the economy or whether we ought to allocate it to the social value sector. To me, it seems clear that it should be part of the social value sector and that there's no place for companies that are primarily profit-oriented in that sector. So what I would do is bar such companies from that sector and make them ineligible for the public support that would be available for other companies that would occupy that particular sector. Now, that might not be consistent with the original notion of a job guarantee, but I think it's a good way to go.
Well,
okay, and that implies also implies, but further, that well, I've forgotten what it implies further now, slipped away. Okay, perhaps it will come back. But the basic point about the social value sector is that it would be funded by the federal government and administered by local communities, nonprofit groups, okay, in local communities, and social entrepreneurial ventures in those communities. And the shaping of the jobs would in part be democratically determined by the people who were doing those jobs. And there would be a sector within that social value sector that would be devoted to refashioning the economy to solve the climate change problem.
let me
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think there's an idea that occurred to me that it's not specifically targeted at climate change, but it is about refashioning society. And I do think that, and this is something that would become the target for right-wing lunatics to attack, but so be it. But anyway, we would need to introduce it in such a way that it would get maximum buy-in by communities all over the country. But anyway, that basically having community centers, building community centers that are nonprofit, either run by cooperatives or having multiple cooperatives, a physical space. It would be a physical space, a building.
Indeed.
And that basically it would create a nonprofit space that basically every community should have. I mean, beside the city hall or whatever it is. I mean, it could be a cooperative with the city government and so forth and so on. But anyway,
absolutely,
creating a space that basically, because there's just so much anomie in our society. The opioid crisis is in part a crisis of anomie, a crisis of lack of human contact with each other,
alienation,
a society based on consumption, and going. The mall is the place. The mall has become the place where people socialize, and malls only. I mean, some malls do have a social room. They do have the sort of the, but it's all based on whether the developer decides to build a social room or not. And so, and you need also, I think, people to think up ideas about, so what can we do to put on a, whatever community theater production, or what can we do to have a choir? I mean, there's church choirs. I understand that churches often play this role.
Yeah, we have the same idea. We want to have public spaces where people can come together and can generate ideas for new enterprises and new projects. Okay, and we need to have that supported by the government as part of the job guarantee program.
Well, even not just enterprises, but just places for people to be. In other words, to be.
Yes, I agree. Similar to the union halls.
Right, but without.
At other times.
Sure, but in this case, for the community, based on a community, not based on a membership in a particular work group or a particular, but just simply being in that community. And so I mean, it's something that is not. Some communities do have this already. They've created. They have a community spirit. They have, or it's everybody in the community is basically a member of the same church. So they all use the church as the center, the community center, and so forth and so on. And they have a pastor that is particularly, community minded. It happens by accident, somehow, or by circumstance but that's not to be assumed in the United States, especially. We're a very diverse country, and we're becoming more diverse by religion, by ethnicity, so forth and so on. And we need spaces that are common, where people can come together and be a part of the community that's beyond the school, beyond the so forth and so on, beyond purpose-driven things. I mean, this is my opinion. So, but
Yes, and mine too. Okay, that also squares with mine. Okay, Stevie Edie comments: socially valuable roles that people don't want should come with a livable wage. That should be the incentive to do dirty jobs. Would you like to comment on that?
Absolutely. The dirty jobs that are important need to be valued highly. They need to be respected. They also respected in terms of the wage that they get, the benefits they get, and also just in terms of the social value accorded those jobs. I mean, they shouldn't be looked down upon. Some of that social value can accrue by getting certifications, training. In other words, like in Germany, those jobs are generally considered on a higher level. Most jobs, manual jobs, for instance, because of a very hierarchical, you could say, or very stage-wise certification system where you become a Meister, and so people who work with their hands are accorded a respect that in the United States they don't have so much, because sometimes those levels are attached to a union, in terms of you're a journeyman and you move on to being a regular whatever plumber or something, so forth and so on. But to have those made as a professional sort of a commitment to being part of a profession. So I think that we need trades, various kinds of manual trades, these things do exist in the United States, but we need them, I think, elevated more, because people look down on that and they think you have to go to college and you have to. You're not a respectable person if you don't go to college, and so we create that for a number of these new jobs that are needed. For instance, air sealing and insulation contract, because right now those jobs are not considered to be particularly, they're not well compensated right now, but they're needed badly, and they will be. And if my program is put in place, they will be in very high demand.
Yes, that I think is very clear. Okay, what I want to say about that, Stevie, is that first of all, if we were to put this program in place and other programs that are favored by MMT people, then everyone would have a living wage with good fringe benefits. Okay, and the people who were doing the dirty jobs, I think, would be entitled to more than simply a living wage, because they would be doing the dirty jobs, that no one else wants. In other words, the reason why they don't get paid for those jobs right now is because of the loose employment situation in the labor market, because wages have been repressed in the labor market, and they've been repressed because there's a buffer, of unemployed people. Okay, when there's no more buffer, of unemployed people, you're going to have to get people more, to pay people more to take the dirty jobs, because the market is going to determine that. But for jobs in the social value sector, I think they should be accorded a higher wage than simply a living wage. So anyway, next question. Okay. We're getting a lot of demands here for part 2, Michael. This seems to be a very popular idea. Yeah, I'm getting all kinds of comments like that now, Mike.
Oh, well, thank you.
Okay, so we hope you come back. And Lyle Baker has a question. Would there be enough policy space, goods, services, etc., for a green jobs program if the alternate energy transformation were to be on steroids? Would you care to comment on that one, Mike?
I'm taking that to mean that would there be demands for the green jobs program if the transformation were on steroids? In other words, would there be people who were in the green jobs program because they would be employed then outside the green jobs program because of the demand? I'm taking that to be the question. Policy space it's more like the economic space. In other words, the demand, the actual individuals signing up for the GJP. That's what I'm interpreting the question to be.
Yeah, that's probably what Lyle had in mind. It would be like a World War II situation where the war was sucking up 15 million people out of the labor force. So the question is, would there be enough people to fill the other available jobs?
He just says a guarantee. He's just talking about a job guarantee. He just texted there. He said, the G means guaranteed jobs program.
Guarantee. I thought it meant green jobs.
A JG. He's talking about a JG. So
okay.
Would there be enough? Would there be enough? So I'm still interpreting that to mean, though, that if the JG, because of the high demand for labor, that would there be people in the JG? Would there be? You could policy spaces basically. Some politicians could pass a JG, but then no one could be in it because of the rampant demand for labor. That's how I'm interpreting it. That you could theoretically pass a program saying, here's your job guarantee program, but no one could be in it because everyone could be employed. That's
along lines of my previous comment that with your program in place, it might be the case that the job guarantee would fall all the way down to less than 1 million people, perhaps even 500,000 people. I think there would always be some people around who might want to work in the job guarantee program, but not in the green sector.
Yes.
In other words, in social services, of various other kinds, healthcare, for example, caring for the elderly, lots of other valuable work in the socially valuable in the social value sector to do.
Right.
Okay? And there are many people who might still want to remain in the job guarantee program to do those kinds of things at a living wage.
Yeah. Well, what I'm proposing is a huge construction project. I mean, there are other components to this, but this is. I have another post on New Economic Perspectives where I talk about the I forget the word I used for it, but anyway, because this was a few years ago. But the energy transition, climate action. I think I said climate action is a giant building project. Okay,
yes.
And that was one of my posts a while ago on New Economic Perspectives. And so it's a sector. There's demand in a certain sector for a certain type of worker. There will be not necessarily more demand for people who are people who are involved in social services, and they would be engaged in a job guarantee. And in fact, I think that there's a valuable role for a job guarantee, given the fact that beyond its general usefulness, that because of the sectoral imbalance of this particular program that I'm proposing, is that it's so weighted toward manufacturing and construction that and I guess you could say agriculture and forestry as well. Agriculture, forestry, land use stuff. There's a lot of different areas where people would be demanded, labor would be demanded, but there are other areas which remain largely unchanged, and in fact, a JG would be very useful there. So it's a sectoral demand for labor.
Yes. Okay, Rebecca McClaskey says, job guarantee could do construction training by doing deconstruction for reclaiming resources from the old buildings so new ones can be built. And she says, I think Ohio did that, where people worked in the neighborhoods deconstructing the old homes. The materials of good lumber, fixtures, bricks are then sold for funds to help to maintain the program. Any comments on that comment?
I mean, that's an interesting job. I mean, that's a green use of old buildings that are probably leaky, that could never be transformed into a passive house, which is the standard of construction that I think should be followed in the future. So, because they're leaky and they have materials in them that could be used, reused for a more efficient building, a building that would probably be more desirable from the point of view of its amenities and so forth and so on, and as well as its thermal performance in terms of keeping heat either in or out depending on the temperature outside, and also comfort and usefulness in terms of how people like their spaces designed. So anyway, it sounds like a good use of a job guarantee program, because that kind of a work would probably be very, very poorly paid by a private sector. But on the other hand, it's socially useful in that you're reclaiming generally products that could generally be used, not all of them, products from, like, for instance, you wouldn't want to be asbestos, you would want to definitely get rid of. There are products from older construction that need to be disposed of properly, and you would not want to reuse them.
Okay, we have a request for the spelling, of anomie. So I'm going to show that on the screen now, at least if this works. It doesn't seem to be working. It didn't seem to go up on the screen.
Anomie.
Yes, Anomie. So Google that, and you'll read about Durkheim, undoubtedly. Durkheim.
Joe, I'm needing to head out, but I will contact you about our volume 2.
Okay, so thank you for coming, Michael. Okay, I really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
And I know we'll have a bang-up conversation in volume 2 as well. So I'll say goodnight to you at this point.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll take you out of the show.
Okie doke.
Okay, into the lobby first, and then you can disconnect your camera, and I'll go on with the Q&A session. Okay, if there are any more comments or questions. So good night, Mike. Have a great night. Okay. So there we are. Mike is gone at this point. There is a Chanzo Greenidge. I'm not going to post this one because it's so long, but I'll read it. It says, this 3-sector approach is correct, but within the market sector, a differentiation has to be made between big business and finance and micro small enterprise. These two need to be separated, with big business being limited from engaging in outsourcing to small business, but also in participating in international trade. They should also be restricted from government procurement, which should flow primarily to small businesses. The job guarantee is the tip of the iceberg and should only be for the length of time necessary for individuals to acquire life necessities and capital to form their own enterprises. This capital formation should be expanded by recognizing students as a mandate, thus allowing them to accrue capital by going to school and recognizing the economic value of care. The human rights social sector would be greatly helped by sustainable energy. Well, I think those are very, very good ideas, Chanzo. I have to think about some of them a little more. Some of them are very obviously good ideas to me, like this capital formation should be extended by recognizing students as a mandate, thus allowing them to create capital by going to school and recognizing the economic value of care. I agree with that, and also about your comments on the human rights social sector. I would tend to think, to say the idea of separating big businesses from small businesses within the market value sector and treating them in different ways, and in international trade also, uh, that's probably a very good idea too. But I have to think through the full implications of that idea, because uh, I don't think it's a simple idea in terms of thinking through its the consequences. But I do tend to be very sympathetic to ideas about protecting small business from unfair competition by the multinationals and the very large businesses. And I really think we should make a great effort to do that. So I have to think about your proposals here, okay, a little more, but I do think off the top of my head that they're quite good. Uh, Teresa Sanders points out that this old house is bringing kids onto this show to train because there are not enough skilled workers. Okay. And Michael Simmons thinks that you are lying. I don't quite know who you is, whether it's me or somebody else. Okay, but for my part, I do not lie. In any case, Real Progressives says, and I'm not sure who that is right now. I'm also not sure why. Okay, let me see if I can post the Real Progressives comments. I don't know why it's not going on the screen. There must be something else here interfering. But anyway, I'm not seeing things on screen right now for some reason. Anyway, Real Progressive says those dirty jobs should also come with benefits and a safety net for when these people can no longer do manual labor. Yes, I entirely agree. Also, by the way, I don't think the job guarantee or any kind of basic income that would be given to people in the human rights sector should involve any replacement of present social benefits that we already have. I don't know if people would take advantage of them to the same extent, but I do believe they certainly ought to stay in place. I'm not looking to replace any social welfare expenditures we have now with some of the new programs that we are talking about here. And Steve Evie says those dirty jobs should also come with benefits and a safety net for when these people can no longer do manual labor. So Steve Evie was probably posting his Real Progressives just before. Steve Evie says yes, part two for sure. And Michael Simmons thinks I'm lying about wages. No, I'm not lying about wages. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sandy Shellis wants a part two. Lyle Baker says guaranteed, but not green. Lyle Baker says, Joe, yes, would the energy transforming like World War II leave any need for a job guarantee program? I think the answer to that question is yes. There is always a need for a job guarantee program because there will be people who won't want to work in the green jobs sector, but who would like to work in caring for people or doing other community jobs which are also valuable. And I think we'd like to provide them the freedom to do those kinds of things. And there will also be people who don't fit into various jobs, but who might fit into the social value sector of a job guarantee program, even though they would not fit into a green jobs program. Consider this, though, there might not be much need for a job guarantee program. I spoke of us having a need to probably put as many as 25 million people right now into a job guarantee program, okay, if it were a program we had now. And the reason for that is I think we are vastly underestimating the number of people who would want jobs and take jobs in the social value sector if they were available through such a program. Okay, at this point, that our unemployment statistics are greatly biased by the workings of government over a period of years to redefine the group that it considers to be the unemployed group. So, but all that said, with the kind of spending Mike's talking about, I'm certain the end result would be just a small number of people still available for a job guarantee program outside of the green sector. I think that might fall, as I said, to 500,000 or so. Anyway, that's what I would expect. It would be a relatively small number of people. The cost of such a program with 500,000 people in it would be very, very small. It would probably take the program down to 30, 40, 50 billion dollars a year. In other words, it would dwarf what its size might be now, would be more like $750 billion a year. So we're talking about a great shrinkage in that program. But the point is, it would always be there to compensate for any cycles we might encounter. Okay, now to start with, when the economy is really booming with the Green Transformation Program, we would most likely have a situation where it would all be upcycle, and the problem would be controlling inflation. And there would not be severe downturns in the economy such that people would need a job guarantee program to cushion the cycles. But we have to look ahead. If we move ahead after 5 years of this, or 10 years of this, the economy would have greatly expanded and the productive capacity would have greatly expanded in the green area. And there might be situations where there were shortages in certain other areas and where these other areas would not be able to absorb the people who would like to work in them. And we might find that we have some unemployment, in other sectors. And then we would need the job transition, the function of the job guarantee program. And Mark Fabian says, or is he asking how much policy space before it becomes inflationary? Um, so, how much policy space before it becomes inflationary? We cannot predict that. It's just extremely difficult, okay, to predict that. We don't have MMT-based dynamic models, okay, at this point, which could tell us exactly how much policy space will be becoming available as we expand the economy. Depends very much on the fiscal multipliers involved, which in turn depend upon the kinds of people that would be reached by the Green Jobs Program and what their propensity to consume would be as opposed to other groups within the economy. But I think as the economy expands rapidly, the policy space would also expand rapidly, not as a percentage of GDP, and might remain constant as a percentage of GDP. But the absolute value of it would increase. In other words, the absolute amount of policy space, okay, would increase. So over a period of time, okay, maybe over 4, 5, 6 years or so, that 4 to 6 trillion in government spending may not seem like so much relative to the expanded size of the economy, because that kind of spending would add to lots of growth in the economy. Okay, so where are we now? And Michael Simmons says, how did it work out for Venezuela? Well, not very well, but after all, what's going on, okay, in Venezuela is that they have an oil-based economy. They don't have a sovereign currency, that is a monetarily sovereign currency, because they're compromised, okay, by international debt and at times also by fixing the exchange rate, okay, of their currency. And furthermore, they're also compromised by the CIA and by other groups within our security agencies who have been trying to destabilize their government now since at least shortly after the time that Chavez took over. So that's a situation where they've been sowing discord inside of the Venezuelan economy since that time, spending considerable money on the internal dissidents and allowing them to become far more powerful than they otherwise would have been. So that's why things are not working out well for Venezuela, I'm afraid. But Venezuela is not like the United States. It doesn't have the same kind of economy, nor do I think that the foreign equivalent of central intelligence agencies are going to be so powerful here that they can have a hand in threatening the government, okay, or overthrowing the government. Okay, now Venezuela has been able to avoid that fate thus far, and the Chavistas are still in very precarious control. No thanks to the United States, which has been interfering in their internal affairs for more than a decade now. Okay, looks like we're winding down now. Okay, unless anybody has a really pregnant question. Sandy says, thank you, Joe. Great work. And Rebecca McClaskey, Joe, could you do a show on the new tax reform? I think being armed with the truth and dangers of good policy would be helpful in talking to others about social purpose. I'm wondering about the capital gains, if there are changes there, since that is where most of the loopholes were. Okay. Well, Rebecca, I will take that under advisement. I'll see what seems to be pregnant for next week, and perhaps I will take that up. Sandy Degg says, don't mess with Joe. Well, Sandy, I don't consider Michael Simmons messing with me to be very much messing. He's really more humorous and silly than anything else at this point. And Evan Haug says, how about nationalizing all pensions due to the extent they are stolen by the private sector through the Social Security Administration based on lifetime earnings and perhaps other actuarial considerations? Well, Evan, I think that's a very interesting policy suggestion. You mean take the pensions off the hands of the companies that would otherwise manage to abscond with them. Yeah, I mean, I could go for that. I think it would be down the line somewhat with respect to policy priorities, because things like a Medicare for All like a Medicare for All plan, and also green energy, and the job guarantee would probably come first. But I think there is an element of social justice here, which we would have to fulfill. Dr. Joe, says Lyle Baker, I put as my next comment the anti-cyclic nature of the job guarantee would idle it down. Okay, in other words, meaning that since the job guarantee, though it provides an initial stimulus for wages, as you work through, it becomes an anchor for wages, so that it becomes difficult for people to ask for raises when the job guarantee program is in place, because depending on their work, it's possible for the employers to simply say no and to replace the workers who are unsatisfied with the no with somebody from the job guarantee pool. Now, this is the way it's supposed to work, but I don't necessarily think it would work that way in a, I don't know how effective that would be in an economy that was booming to the extent that the green jobs economy would be with a program like Michael's. In other words, if we had only 500,000 people left in the job guarantee program, there wouldn't be very many people available to hire from. And in order to get them out of the job guarantee program, you might also have to consider paying them a considerable amount of money. The job guarantee program does provide an anchor slowing down inflation, but you can imagine situations in which the anchor doesn't stop the wage rises because it's not a weighty enough pool of people. Joe, could you do a show on Tulsi Gabbard's HR 3671, the Off Fossil Fuels for a Better Future Act, like you did for HR 676? So again, that's a good suggestion, and I'll certainly consider it, Mark. And Mark said that was in regard to Lyle's question. Thank you, Mark. And Lyle says, I would not delay alternative energy manufacturing for automation to lessen the cost, but it would happen rapidly on its own if it's not already automated now, and possibly more so in China, I guess, based on their leadership implementing automation and artificial intelligence. I think too, Lyle. I agree. It would happen rapidly on its own anyway. And Evan Haug says, Mark, I think they should be, and they're not because of the theft that occurred during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. This has to be a drag on the economy as seniors have less to spend, stay in the workplace longer, and displace young people from wages and work experience. Seems like well-targeted deficit spending to me. And yes, Evan, I really think that is a good idea. Maybe it's something we could slip through in the first year. And Russell Gorman says, I've got to call it a night. 11 p.m. is saying hello. I agree, Russell. 11 p.m. is saying hello. And I think we probably do have to call it a night. So thanks, everyone. Oh, Lyle says the aside on Venezuela was great. I never read on what happened there in any even limited detail. Well, maybe Trish Roberts would be willing to do a show on Venezuela and what's happened in Venezuela. Maybe she can get Abby Martin to come on her show and tell you all about what's been happening in Venezuela. I can't think of a greater expert on this than Abby Martin. Allison Drucker says, as for raises, Dr. J, don't make me laugh. In the booming economy that Michael intends to create, we would all be asking for raises. Lyle Baker says, yes, that is what I meant. With so much employment with the energy jobs, the guaranteed jobs program would automatically idle back down so that 500,000 or so folks. Yes, I was trying to say I got it more than that was a question. Okay. And I'm getting more thank yous. And Lyle Baker says, yes, on Trish Roberts. I should have known Abby Martin would have covered this. Well, I think, I'm not sure she covered it, but I seem to remember some shows where she talked about it. And of course, now you know she works for Telesur, which is a Venezuelan news company, okay, media company. And she does her Empire Files show for them now, I believe. And if she spent any time in Venezuela, which I suspect she has, she's probably been very well introduced to the goings-on, okay, of Empire down there. So thank you all again. Okay, for a great show, I think it is time to say goodnight. And I'm going to do that since our attendance has fallen now to 25 people still hanging in there with me. Okay, good night. I'll see you next Saturday. If I don't see you sometime in between one of these days, I want to get in a live stream on Madonna, Brazil. But anyway, bye-bye.